Hey guys, it's Pineapple, and in this video, we'll be discussing every member of the League of Villains. I recently, did a video breaking down who the top 5 heroes are, including what their quirks do, so I figure I might as well do the same for the League, which has definitely changed quite a bit since the beginning of the series. You guys can follow me on Twitter at VocalPineapple, and you can subscribe and hit that bell icon to keep up with my videos. With that said, let's get to explaining how the League of Villains has grown to well over 20 members after that intro. Hit it! So continuing with my series of videos that more or less serve as a sort of database of videos on groups of characters that you can easily search through, I'll be going through each member of the League of Villains. If I miss one, check the comments to see if someone else reminded me before you do, because please. Hopefully we do get them all in one go though, even though I'm sure this video will have to be updated at some point, but for now, let's get started. We'll start first with Himiko Toga. Toga's quirk is called Transform. Transform lets her change her appearance to match a person whose blood she ingests, but under some unclear circumstances, she's able to copy the person's quirk. The length of time that she can stay in these transformations is based on how much of the blood that she ingests. Toga was actually pretty mysterious for quite a while, but during the Liberation Army arc, we actually got a decent bit of information on her. Toga was born to a prestigious family, but they could never accept her because of her fascination with blood that comes from her quirk. Because of this, they tried to force her to be normal without trying to think of what was normal for their daughter. All of this stress led to Toga stabbing her crush on the day of middle school graduation, and since then she's been on the run, stabbing and desanguinating people all over Japan. That brings us to her first appearance in the series, where she joins the League because she was interested in Stain while in the middle of her murders. She's insanely fast and agile, and I don't doubt that Toga will be around in the story for a long time. She was injured really badly and nearly died during the Liberation Army arc, but she's managed to link herself to a few characters in the series like Deku and Ochako, so I'm sure she'll live to see them both another day. Deku and the others know that Toga has the ability to transform thanks to Deku seeing her during the Chisaki arc, but it'll be interesting to see what they think when they find out about her new ability to copy quirks. Next up, we've got Twice. Twice's real name is Bubai Gawara Jin, and his quirk is called Double. Double lets Twice create 2 copies of something. The first copy is weaker than the original thing that gets copied, and the second copy is even weaker than the first. Now Twice's quirk is extremely powerful because if Twice copies a person and they have a quirk, his copy can use their quirk, but he needs someone's measurements to copy them. This means that if Twice copies you and flies to another country for 20 years, the clones of you that he makes will all still be of the you from 20 years ago because he needs to remeasure you to update his cloning data. Twice can get over his quirk's 2 copy maximum by copying himself and having his clone copy itself. This makes it so that each clone's copy has the durability of the first copy, which means he's pretty much using an exploit on his quirk. Twice definitely has an interesting backstory, and I'd compare it to a mix of Naruto and Deadpool's backstories in a way. He's this young guy whose life just goes awful due to a series of unfortunate events, and he isn't really ever able to get it back on track. In his loneliness, he clones himself to have company and realizes that the only person that he can trust is himself. It reminds me of those times where Naruto would make clones to play cards with himself or argue to solve a problem back during part 1, but Twice definitely let it get a little out of hand. Twice can't just dispel his clones once they're made, and they retain the personality of the original, so they have to be told that they're a clone and that their life is expendable, which Twice loves to explain to the clones, but imagine being a clone of yourself and being told that. That's pretty weird. He's mentally unstable for much of the series, but he severely improves during the Liberation Army arc. For the longest time, he suffered from a split personality, and much like Deadpool, he'd have 2 speech bubbles arguing back and forth about what he should or shouldn't do. He's definitely a character, but he's one of the more popular members of the League in the fandom, and he's pretty much the shonen protagonist of the Liberation Army arc. He's the heart and soul of some of the biggest character moments in this arc, and his passion for wanting to save Giran pushes everyone towards the tower and towards defeating the Liberation Army even harder. It isn't clear what's next for Twice, since there's literally giant waves of Twice clones spilling over into the town, and Twice's mental instability isn't completely gone, but here's hoping this sad man's parade has a peaceful ending. Next up, we've got Giran. Giran is seemingly quirkless as far as we know, and he is a support item and weapons dealer for the League of Villains, but that's not the only client that he has. Giran also provides gear to vigilantes like Knuckle Duster from the side manga, so he's pretty much the Mei Hatsume of the villain society. Everyone goes to him for their gear, and that comes with a lot of trust, which he's earned since he'd do anything to keep his client's data from leaking. In the current Liberation Army arc, he gets kidnapped and then his fingers are cut off during his torture to try and get the information out of him. They got the information through other means, but Giran never never gave it up, and that's really impressive. While the arc isn't over at the moment, Giron seems to be in the custody of a wave of Twice clones that are gonna get him to safety and hopefully get him out of this situation, but now with his client list leaked and this huge spectacle happening, will there be some sort of backlash from the rest of the underworld? It seems like no matter what they do, the League of Villains is just gonna keep stepping on the toes of other groups in the underworld. The next villain we're talking about is Mr. Compress, and his real name is Atsuhiro Sako, and his quirk is obviously called Compress. This quirk lets him take a certain amount of space around the palm of his hand and make it tiny while sealing it inside a tiny marble. It's pretty much like he's using tiny Pokeballs to capture things and store them, and he can undo his quirk to send things back to their original size. We've seen him do this to dig tunnels underground, block attacks, and we know that at the very least, Compress can turn a full human body into one of those marbles, since that's how the League kidnapped Bakugo and almost Tokoyami in Season 3. Mr. Compress seemed to be one of the leaders of the Vanguard Action Squad's operation during Season 3, but since then he's had a rather hard time. He gets stomped on pretty hard by the kids, loses an arm during the League's first meeting of Chisaki in the internship arc, and even his clone gets destroyed later on as that arc goes on. He does get some sweet revenge by taking Overhaul's arm at the end of that arc, and they still have that arm, so I'm sure that's going to be useful or somehow relevant in the future later on in the story, but for now we have no idea. He still hasn't had a standout fight with anyone, so it isn't clear how well his quirk could be used in an outright fight, or what his martial arts capabilities are if he has any at all, but combat experience or not, I'd rather stay away from his quirk and not lose an arm or an appendage. Another character that had a tough time during the Chisaki arc was Magna. Magna's real name is Kenji Hikashi. Magna keeps it pretty casual by wearing a white t-shirt with a tan jacket and some jeans. Magna also carries around a very large magnet, and obviously the name and her magnet on her back have to do with her quirk, magnetism. Magna's quirk allows her to magnetize people that are within 4.5 meters of her. While she can pick which body parts get magnetized, she can also decide to just magnetize their entire body and send them flying. Interestingly enough, it seems that a person's gender determines what sort of polarity their magnetism has. Females are polarized north and men are polarized south. This allows Magna to pull off some pretty impressive stuff with her quirk, like pairing up two people of the same gender and having one be repelled with extreme speed due to the power of magnetism. Now, Magna was a transgender woman that seemed to be really beloved by each of the members of the League of Villains until she was sadly turned into a Jimmy Neutron villain by Overhaul during the League's first meeting with him at the beginning of Season 4. This left some really bad feelings in the air between both groups and led to Toga and Twice having their fun while betraying Chisaki during that arc as a way of getting revenge on Overhaul for killing their friend. Magna's death is really abrupt, but it comes right at the beginning of one of the darkest arcs of the series, so her death pretty much was placed there to show us that things are about to go down in a big way, and really got the arc started on a massive tone shift by having characters actually start dying. Spinner is our lizard member of the League of Villains, and his real name is Shuichi Iguchi. Spinner's quirk is called Gecko, and it lets him crawl on walls, and that seems to be it as far as we know. He's a NEET that faces discrimination because he's a lizard human, and some people in the My Hero world are racist against people with quirks that change their appearance. Spinner is really self-conscious, and he's seemingly looking for something to hold on to in the world. Stain had fans like this because Stain's ideology struck a chord with those who wanted to do whatever they wanted. It's like Stain was saying, nobody can stop me from living the way I want, but All Might. And then All Might is taken out of the picture by All for One, so now more than ever, it's like there's a lane for Stain's support to increase. Spinner idolizes Stain and joins the League thinking that they're going to carry on Stain's will, since it was rumored that he was a member of the League. After questioning the League and whether or not he even wants to continue, he realizes that he wants to see Shigaraki destroy everything to see what it would look like. So it seems like Spinner has once again doubled down on his villain persona, and he's casting aside the world to be selfish and live the way that he wants, because it's the only way that he feels he can. I think he's a fun member of the League who I wish had more screen time, and since his quirk lets him climb walls and he uses knives and swords, you could definitely see him having a job as a Ninja Turtles villain if being a villain in the My Hero world doesn't work out. Muscular is a vicious psychopath who tears his way through the world of My Hero Academia as a serial killer. His quirk, Muscle Augmentation, allows him to completely control the mass of his muscle fibers, meaning that he can make himself huge and super powerful, and he can even control his muscle fibers to give himself armor and grab enemies at close to mid-range. Muscular enters our story during the Vanguard Action Squad's attack on the Forest Training Camp in Season 3, and he ends up fighting Deku at Koda's secret hiding spot. This is where we find out that Muscular is actually the villain that killed Koda's parents, leaving him to be raised by the Pussycats on this mountain. They managed to take his eye with them, so he has these really grotesque eye attachments, but it isn't really clear to me what any of these do. Deku barely manages to defeat Muscular with the Delaware Detroit Smash, and the villain is ultimately arrested and taken into custody. Now, we've seen that Stain and All For One are in the same prison, but it's left in the air where specifically Muscular is sent to. I'd imagine that he'd be in the same prison with those two guys because he's also up there as an A-rank villain, and Tartarus Prison is where most of the most dangerous villains go. Speaking of members that have probably spent the majority of their life inside a padded jail cell, we have Moonfish. Moonfish is a villain completely enclosed in a straitjacket. Moonfish's entire body is covered by this jacket, even his face and eyes, except for his mouth, which is exposed and held wide open by clamps protruding from the suit. Moonfish is one of the taller members of the Vanguard Action Squad, and he has an obsession with human flesh, or really just flesh in general. It's kind of weird. Moonfish doesn't really speak much, but he does have a working brain since he's able to repeat important information to himself during missions, and he's also able to mock his opponents. Usually though, he's just clamoring on about flesh and wanting to see more torn flesh. That shouldn't be that hard to get to see with his quirk, Toothblade. Toothblade allows Moonfish to turn his teeth into powerful blades that he can control at will. He can completely control their size, hardness, and shape, and these blades aren't fodder either, as they're capable of breaking through Todoroki's ice. He gets defeated by a rampaging Tokoyami, and hopefully they put him under the prison this time. He definitely has to have a solid reputation because Chisaki was annoyed of Shigaraki and says that they let Moonfish go to waste. On to the next member of the team, we have Mustard. Mustard is a short male with blonde hair who wears a gas mask that completely blocks off his face. We don't really know much about Mustard, however we do know that he's a student due to his size and the fact that he's wearing a school uniform at all times. This is really interesting to me because most of the villains that we've come across in this series are adults and already have long histories as villains, whereas Mustard is just a student who seems to have been corrupted by Stain's influence enough to join the League of Villains. His quirk doesn't actually have a name, but it allows him to generate and manipulate a gas that puts people to sleep. However, Mustard himself isn't immune to the gas. There are a few fan theories out there that suggest that Mustard might have some sort of relation to Midnight since their quirks are a little similar to a certain degree. However, that's another topic for another time. When all else fails, Mustard goes old school with his 38 revolver. He brings his gun along just in case someone's immune to his gas for some reason, or he has to take out somebody while they're asleep. The gun isn't just for show since he's able to use it with some pretty high proficiency, and the revolver definitely fits his World War Soldier motif, along with his name Mustard, which is a direct reference to the deadly mustard gas that was used during the World Wars. Another League member that enjoys being covered in mist and shadow is Kurogiri. Kurogiri is the large black smoke monster in human form of a man that we see running the League's bar back when that was their hideout. He's a personal friend of All For One, and Shigaraki has pretty much been in his care all this time. His quirk lets him open portals with the smoky substance that comes off of his body, and he can make small portals or big portals within a certain range. It's a really useful quirk, especially if you have to move a big group of people at once, but it also works just on a small level of being able to send attacks that are coming your way back at the quirk user or their allies. After All For One is captured, Kurogiri tells Shigaraki that he has to leave him to go get the power that All For One left behind for him to use in case of All For One's capture. He gets captured by Gran Torino, but he does manage to unleash this power, who we'll talk about a bit later in the video. Luckily for the heroes, Kurogiri is locked up in what I'd bet is a maximum security prison, but we almost lost Gran Torino for what pretty much amounts to a shallow victory, since the League can already teleport with other means. Kurogiri was definitely the perfect pawn for All For One to give to the heroes, because he opened up space for the King and the Rook to move, and because of that you could say that Kurogiri is one of the most clutch members in the League because he gave them access to a whole new world of hell. Before we get into that, we still have to talk about everyone's favorite League member that I haven't mentioned yet, Dabi. Dabi's real name is Toya Todoroki. I mean, it's not confirmed. It's not exactly confirmed as close as it may seem, so for now we'll just say his real name is unknown. Dabi's quirk doesn't have an official name, but Dabi itself means cremation, and that's what he does with his flames, so that's what most people go with. Cremation allows him to create and manipulate intense blue flames from his body that he usually shoots out of his hands so violently that they generate recoil. These flames burn so hot that he cremates the remains of his victims, leaving only ash. But the flames also injure Dabi, whose body isn't resilient enough to deal with the heat of the flames, causing the scars that you see all over his body. He's a young man who wears a pretty basic outfit, which consists of a white deep V-neck, a dark blue jacket, and some dark blue pants. Dabi is a fan favorite character since his personality is fairly stoic and aloof. He has a strong mind, but is definitely a little deranged at the same time, and when we were introduced to him, he seemed to believe in Stain's ideal world so much that he wanted to be the one to make that world a reality. Dabi gets along rather well with his other League members, but his lack of manners makes it so that it doesn't always seem that way. His two most talked about scenes in the series are when he confronts Shoto in the Forest arc and when he confronts Endeavor during the Pro Heroes arc, making us pray that a reveal is coming of all three of these characters at the same place and time at some point in the future. Dabi gets some of the most focus out of all of the League of Villains characters, but also gets put off screen quite a bit, which frustrates the fans. I just did a Dabi's quirk explain video explaining the levels to his fire and why his flames are blue, and apparently his villain alias is Blue Flame. It's Blue Flame. And that's probably because of how distinct those flames are. After showing up during the Endeavor arc fight, which everyone had their eyes on, and with the mass reports of burning bodies being found with blue flames smoldering on them, Dabi has definitely gotten a big reputation, and that seems to be something that he's actually pretty happy with. The next member of the League is the powerful and brand new Hien Nomu. The Hien Nomu's codename is Hood, and it seems to have 5 or 6 different quirks. Hood first appears during the Pro Heroes arc by flying straight into the building that Endeavor and Hawks are having a conversation in, and starting a giant battle between the Nomu and the 2 heroes that involves skyscrapers getting sliced in half, Endeavor almost losing an eye and getting a huge scar on his face that funny enough matches Todoroki's scar a bit, and Endeavor using a massive flame explosion and almost dying to finally take it down. Now, you can't count the Hien Nomu as a member of the League. Well, this Nomu is extremely powerful, has a personality, can speak, and it can also send out white Nomu from its body to terrorize a town as it starts destroying buildings. It has Muscular's muscle augmentation, it has regeneration, it has jets that can protrude from its shoulders to let it fly or float, it can transform its hands and arms into wings or weapons. There's just so much that this thing does, and it might not have even gotten to use everything that it had because Endeavor had to burn out for this thing to finally die. Its body sadly, or I guess thankfully depending on whose perspective you're talking from, wasn't recovered. So this is another member of the League that we can mark as dead. Now the creator of the strange Hien Nomu is the Doctor. His code name is Ujiko, and it's unknown whether or not the Doctor is a quirk user as far as I know. The long-running theory that the Doctor that told Deku that he didn't have a quirk was the same Doctor that was secretly caring for All For One ended up being confirmed as the story went on, and it was revealed to us that Ujiko had been helping All For One in many ways from the shadows. He's to blame for the creation of the Nomu, and he's an evil genius who must have some extreme knowledge of quirks to do the things that he can do. He can seemingly transplant and even copy quirks somehow, which still hasn't been explained, and he has some super secret research for Shigaraki that he's holding over his head while Shigaraki and the others tame All For One's trump card, who we will get to in a moment. Currently, he's helping the villains by becoming their source of funding and finding them places to live and stuff like that because they've been roaming the streets and just killing people and starving with no direction. During this battle of the Liberation Army, I'm sure he'd love to send in Hood, but since he isn't around and the Doctor's other toys aren't ready, he sends in Makia. The other toys I'm talking about are the mysterious 11 Hien Nomu that the Doctor has in his lab, floating in large tubes. Hood the Hien Nomu wasn't the only one, and it seems like he actually has 11 brothers and sisters that I'm sure are all going to be more devastating and more powerful than Hood was. These Nomu are each going to have their own time to shine like Hood did, and I've done a video explaining what I think their purpose is. Once the 11 Hien Nomu are ready to be deployed, it'll be like the League of Villains early on in the series all over again, with the League just showing up with Nomu and attacking population centers. The Liberation Army leader Redestro said that the League of Villains without Nomu is just a group of losers or something like that, but they've shown that they can actually handle themselves fairly well during this current arc. Well, what do you think is going to happen if you take that trained up and stronger League of Villains and give them 11 different versions of the Hien Nomu to join their team and make use of, with different quirks and loadouts that I'm sure are customized to make the group incredibly difficult to deal with as a unit? The League is honestly going to be one of the biggest threats to society that the hero world has ever seen. Even beyond these 11 Nomu, the Doctor says that these Nomu are only a step closer to his true creation, which means that at the end of the day, there's still one more Nomu, or something at least, that the Doctor is working on. And if that thing is supposed to be the high-end version of the Hien Nomu, then I don't even want to see or know how powerful it'll be or what it'll look like. That might actually be some endgame My Hero material right there that we're talking about, so I'm just gonna leave that there. I don't even want to start getting into that. Now, like I said earlier in the video, Kurogiri told Shigaraki that he was gonna retrieve some power for him, but what did he mean? He meant that he was going to summon Gigantomachia. Gigantomachia is a huge man with a strange body that allows him to have multiple quirks without any sort of surgery or enhancements. We first see him at the end of Season 2, funny enough, when the League's new members are being teased, but at this point he's long been a member of the League. This is actually some really early foreshadowing from Horikoshi because he's first seen in chapter 57, but it's just now some 180 chapters later where he's relevant to the story again in a major way. In Kirishima's flashback, Giganto walks up to Ashido and scares some people in front of their school, and they end up pointing him away and sending him walking off. Kirishima and Ashido would definitely recognize him if they saw him again, which from a story writing perspective means that they're definitely gonna see him again. Now, Gigantomachia is a beast. He's an extremely dangerous tool that All For One could have used to store away quirks to have a powerful ally outside while he's stuck in prison. For all we know, All For One might have given all of his other quirks to Gigantomachia, including the All For One quirk itself. This would obviously be besides the quirks that All For One needed to use to fight All Might, but it would call back to Gran Torino noticing that All For One used a completely different loadout of quirks from the last time that he fought All Might. That might be why Giganto despairs so hard over having to acknowledge Shigaraki and maybe even give him the power, because Shigaraki doesn't add up to the master and it's almost like it's actually all for nothing if it has to go to someone so weak. Ever since the League found him, Giganto has been fighting with Shigaraki for entire days and weeks with very little rest. This is basically training Shigaraki up to surpass his limits until Shigaraki can force Giganto to acknowledge him as the leader of the League of Villains. Currently, he's in the middle of destroying the town of Dega, Japan, which the League of Villains are in right now as they fight the Liberation Army. The next member of the League of Villains that I talk about might actually surprise you because he's also the number 2 hero, Hawks. Hawks' quirk Fierce Wings gives him huge wings that he can use in a multitude of ways. He can even control the individual feathers with a form of telekinesis, and some of them can be used as swords or blades that aren't as strong as normal blades, but they work well enough sometimes. Hawks is working on behalf of the government to sneak into the League of Villains, and Dabi tells him that he has one final test to pass before he can become a member. Well, it seems like Hawks has passed the test, or at least he's gonna make it seem like he has, but Dabi isn't there to check because he's preoccupied by the Liberation Army. If Dabi was being honest and Hawks actually did kill Genis, or at least if he can convince Dabi that he did, he'd officially be a member of the League of Villains in the shadows who can even meet up with members like Shigaraki and Toga and talk to the others. Finally, we have the original League of Villains member, All For One. We still don't know All For One's name, but he's been around for a very long time. He uses the quirk All For One that can take a quirk from someone, but he can also use it to give that same quirk to someone else. Being able to steal quirks means that he's able to use those quirks as well, and it seems like he's stolen a number of quirks that have extended his life and made him seemingly immortal as he's lived for generations now. All For One used society and their greed to gain power and force people who owed him favors into working for him as he built his criminal empire. He ruled Japan with an iron fist until All Might finally defeated him before the beginning of the series. He's the reason that One For All exists in the first place, and that same quirk is gonna be the end of him, but many think that All For One secretly has a dark plan for the quirk. Whatever his plans may be, All For One is currently in jail as a result of losing his battle against All Might in My Hero Academia Season 3, but it's clear to everyone that he's only there because he wants to be. What's he waiting for? Nobody knows, but it has led many fans to speculate that we'll eventually get a crazy Prison Break arc featuring All For One, Stain, and various other villains that have been locked away in Tartarus. No matter what comes next, I'm sure the League will find some way to poke their heads in and be involved, and as the main villain group in our story, it'll be interesting to see how much they grow from here and what sort of new members they'll gain as they become the go-to villain group to join for villains in this wild society. I'll make sure to keep you updated on any new members, but that wraps up this video about all of the existing members of the League that we know of. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you guys later. It's Pineapple.